On the docket for tonight, up first we have outside counsel, Ms. McCroskey, here to present the final proposed revisions to the City Telecommunications Code. Good evening, Ms. McCroskey.
Probably help. Hello, good evening. There we go, that's much better. So I am here tonight to talk a little bit about the wireless code update that my firm has been working on with the city attorney and staff over the last few months. We think we have a pretty good draft code, so I am here to go over some of the more significant changes that we've made, why we made those changes, and I can take any questions that anyone may have at the end. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about the objectives that we had with this wireless code update. Then I'm going to touch very briefly on some federal law related to local authority and wireless siting. We're going to talk a little bit about the design standards, safety standards, radio frequency compliance provisions that we have in the draft code. Then we are going to talk about review procedures and requirements, and then I am going to take questions. So the four big objectives we had with this wireless code update: number one, retain local authority to the fullest extent allowed under federal, state law and regulations. In that same vein, we want to retain local authority, but we want to do it in compliance with those federal and state law and regulations. So being compliant with FCC regulations, with Colorado state law regarding wireless siting, were two things that we wanted to do with this update. Another was to get clear processes for the review of wireless permit applications. Under FCC rules, there are some pretty strict deadlines for staff to review and either approve or deny certain types of wireless applications. So we wanted all of that to be as clear as possible. The last thing that we wanted to do, or one of our objectives here in this draft, was stringent design standards. I think we've talked about, when I was here a few months ago, about how the design standards are one area where local governments still retain quite a bit of authority. And so my firm has developed a lot of very stringent standards for each particular type of wireless infrastructure that we've built into this code. So to start off, I wanted to touch on an overview of federal law and local government authority over wireless siting. There are two big provisions that are relevant to us today. The first is what we call Section 253. And that language says that there are no regulations, state or local, this also applies to states, that cannot prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting the ability of any entity to provide service. Prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting are the key words there. The FCC and a few courts of appeals have interpreted that to mean that local government regulations may not materially inhibit the provision of wireless service. So that's the standard. Also, under Section 253, local governments can manage the public rights-of-way on a competitively neutral and non-discriminatory basis.
I am on the council meeting Zoom link. Well, get big echo. You there? And anyway, I'm supposed to.
About telecommunications, right? Yeah. So looking to Section 332 of 47 USC, that retains local authority over the placement, construction, and modification of wireless facilities. That also tells us that local regulations may not unreasonably discriminate amongst providers of similar services. What that really means is competitive neutrality for use of the rights-of-way. In very simple terms, we don't want to charge one provider one number of permit fees and the other a higher cost. They have to be competitively neutral. And also under Section 332 is the provision that local governments shall not regulate wireless facilities based on the environmental effects as radio frequency emissions. And environmental effects also includes health effects. So these are some of the code provisions that I wanted to highlight. I believe you have a version of the draft in front of you. And these are the provisions that I wanted to touch on where we have tried to retain the city's authority, again, to the fullest extent possible under state and federal law. Some of those are design standards, safety standards, the radio frequency requirements that I touched on and we'll discuss a little bit more. We also have a prohibition on towers in the rights of way and some more siting requirements. I'll get into those a little bit more in depth here. So for our design standards, like I said, my firm does a lot of telecommunications work. We are currently appealing one of the FCC's rules regarding a narrowing of local government authority. But because we do this work, we have developed a set of very stringent design standards, like I said, that we have placed into this code. One of those is that we require all infrastructure to be either camouflaged or concealed where possible. Camouflage means that it's a piece of infrastructure that blends into the surrounding environment. Some piece of infrastructure that's concealed is something that does not look like a wireless facility at all. Candidly, that FCC rule is a little bit wonky, and that is one of the rules that we are currently fighting in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But for right now, that is the law, and we have built that into this code. Another concept that we added that the city did not have before was the concept of alternative tower structures. And that means that it is a macro site, so a larger site, but it's fully concealed. It's either a monopine, it's behind a church steeple, it's, again, fully concealed from view, so we don't really have those concerns with the visual impacts that we might otherwise have. Because those facilities are concealed, those get administrative review, but they also have to meet certain standards. One of the other provisions that we have updated is that there is discretion for heightened review in sensitive areas. For applications that would otherwise get administrative review, I believe we've talked about eligible facilities requests a little bit the last time I was here, which are those modifications of existing infrastructure that if they meet certain standards, the city must approve them. But even though they do have to approve those, we've built in discretion for the city manager to institute heightened reviews in areas of visual sensitivity. So that is another thing that we have added. I also wanted to touch on safety standards. This is something that we have been discussing with quite a few local governments that we've worked with, and I wanted to highlight that we have added that all wireless communications facilities in the country must adhere to the standards that are published by the Telecommunications Industry Association as well as the Electronic Industries Association. Anti-climbing measures. We have a requirement for a certain distance between antennas and power lines. And all facilities that will be deployed in the city must be built to withstand maximum wind force when it's fully loaded with all the possible equipment that that facility might be loaded with. Up next, I know this has been a hot topic of discussion, is radio frequency compliance. So again, recall that the FCC has entirely preempted RF emissions standards, both at the state and local level. The state of Colorado legislature also could not force providers to adhere to higher standards than the FCC, even if they wanted to. That is entirely preempted. In that same vein, local governments are not allowed to consider radio frequency when they're reviewing applications for wireless permits or to site a wireless facility. It is an improper denial if a local government denies the siting of a wireless facility based on the environmental or health effects of radio frequency emissions. When they are applying for a permit to deploy their facility in the city, they can self-certify. We require that that certification is signed by a third-party engineer. So even though they are allowed to self-certify, we want someone who's not necessarily that provider putting eyes on it, telling us that it's right. So that we have built that into the code. Stamped report, like I said, from a Colorado professional engineer or from a qualified radio frequency engineer. Something I want to touch on briefly, but that we may want to continue in an executive session or perhaps draft a memo, is this language regarding radio frequency compliance once sites are fully operational. This language says that the city may require the owner or operator to submit cumulative field reports of radio frequency emissions. Now, at my firm, we are of the opinion that this provision is questionably enforceable. At the same time, there are quite a few local governments who have adopted it. So that is going to be a policy decision for the city to make. Again, if we want to discuss that a little bit further, I would recommend we either go into executive session or I can draft a memo. Like I mentioned, we also added a prohibition on towers in the rights-of-way. So those big macro sites, you are not going to be seeing those in the city rights-of-way. You are not going to be seeing those in downtown. In residential zones, we have built-in setbacks that are the minimum for that zone. And towers over 60 feet in height cannot be located within a quarter mile of any existing tower that is over 75 feet in height. We have that fail-safe language in there. Again, if you remember the prohibit or effect of prohibiting language, we always like to have that. If they can demonstrate to us that it is absolutely necessary, we can allow it because, again, that prohibit or effect of prohibiting language is quite strong and we don't want to run afoul of that. So for review procedures and requirements, I touched on this briefly before. The FCC has some pretty strict timelines within which applications for wireless permits must be reviewed and then either approved or denied. They are, I can get into it if you want, but it is incredibly complicated, a little bit boring, and it's a lot of numbers. So I'm happy to talk about it more if you want me to. But suffice to say that small cell facilities and eligible facilities requests have to be reviewed and approved within 50 days. Towers get 150 days. There are different ways that you can stop those shot clocks. You can toll them. There are different ways that they might restart. We have written all of those into the code. It should be quite easy for staff and providers to understand. I mentioned eligible facilities requests. I just wanted to discuss those a little bit more. Those are, like I said, modifications to existing infrastructure that must be approved by the city. The language of the FCC rule is that they may not deny and shall approve. It's a very strong mandate. So if the city has a request for an existing, let's say, macro tower that is only going to expand the height by 10%, the city has to approve that. And one of the issues with this is that if those applications are not reviewed and approved within that time frame, they are deemed granted. And the city will not have the authority then to deny it, even if they had a proper basis. So again, we wanted to get all of those shot clocks in there, all of the different ways that you can toll the shot clock, restart, and really, again, retain local control to the fullest extent possible while remaining compliant with what the FCC tells us local governments have to do. I think that might be all I have. Yes, it is. I will take any questions.
Ms. McCroskey, thank you very much for that presentation. Mayor Pro Tem, lead us off with questions.
A couple of questions to start with. First, in regards to towers themselves, the big structures. We are allowed to determine what zoning districts they're allowed to be placed in. Right now, I believe we hold them to industrial zones under this
I
proposal.
believe that is correct. We have prohibited from the rights of way other than 2 of the industrial zones where they were already a permitted use.
And we do have some industrial areas in our city that directly abut residential. So is there any room in the code for establishing a setback from a residential area as opposed to just saying that it needs to be an industrial zone district?
I would have to take a specific look at the code, but I am quite sure that we have built-in tower setbacks. I believe it is 100% the height of the tower or the zoning minimum for that district. I can double check on that for you though.
And then my second question, the first portion of your slides, I took a note that says, code regarding right-of-way seems different than what was presented previously. It sounds like there's some discretion here for us as far as allowing placement. If I recall our previous conversation, it was basically they tell us where it goes and we have to allow it.
It depends on the type of infrastructure.
Okay.
For the most part. Again, in Colorado, small cell facilities are a use by right in every zoning district, including residential zones. We cannot, unfortunately, ban those from any zone in the city. Towers are much different because those are bigger, they are uglier. A lot of the rules that the FCC has been coming out with recently have been focused on incentivizing small cells and those eligible facilities requests and disincentivizing towers.
Okay.
So towers get a 150-day review. It is not an administrative approval. The city can hold hearings for that if it wants to. And so providers are much more incentivized, again, to deploy smaller infrastructure. And so when it comes to small cells, we have our authority is a little bit more narrow. When it comes to macro facilities, it's a little bit greater.
Okay. And what type of authority do we have over small cells? I mean, I know that we require them to pull a permit, but where does our authority begin and end relative to that permit? Can we say, well, you've proposed it to be on this block and we think it would fit better on this block, and therefore your application on this location is denied, but we would have you move it here or to this other location? Or do they have full authority to determine the location? I need clarification on that question.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to give you a very lawyer answer, and that it depends. So one of those is going to be on a case-by-case basis. So if it is, they're trying to deploy a piece of infrastructure in an area that doesn't have great service, maybe they're trying to densify their network, there is really only one good spot for them to put this piece of infrastructure. The city's authority there is probably going to be a little bit more narrow. If it is a larger, let's say a more rural area of the city, even they don't necessarily need to densify their network. They're not looking at improving coverage. That's somewhere where the city might have a little bit more authority to say, no, we'd really prefer it here. And that's something we do see a lot is negotiations regarding site preferences. For the most part, providers are pretty open to listening to what local governments want. At the same time, if they are able to show that a denial of that permit would be a material inhibition of their provision of service, that's where we might run into some issues.
Okay, and what's the procedure prescribed in this code proposal as far as approval of the site? Is that discretionary on the part of the city, or?
Other than eligible facilities requests, which again must be approved if they meet certain standards, the city does have room here to request that providers move a site, to add different design features. At the same time, the city only has 60 days to review applications for small cells. So it's always a question of balancing, making sure staff can get that done, get that review completed, and within the time frame, and do we have room to talk to the provider about this siting?
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions? Member Woodward.
Thank you. The toll shot clock, who's deciding how long that is? Is that us that sets that?
Unfortunately not. Those are all FCC rules. I'm going to use
Okay.
a small cell as an example, knowing that the city has seen applications for small cells recently. If the city receives an application for a small cell permit, it has 60 days to review and either approve or deny it. However, it has 10 days to review whether or not it is complete. If it is not complete, that is when the city can stop the shot clock, say, you haven't given us everything we need. This is no longer just 60 days. We're going to pause this, and you need to give us all of the documentation that we need to adequately review this request. After that, for small cells, the shot clock starts over. For eligible facilities request, it pauses and then restarts.
Is there a shot clock for the contractor completing the job?
That would be a policy choice for the city. There are no FCC regulations regarding when construction of a wireless facility needs to be done. That would be the city's police powers over its right-of-way.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Member Neunenkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, for coming back with this very helpful recommendation. I have a question about the term qualified radio frequency engineer.
yeah.
Is that a defined term? What does qualified mean?
Excellent question.
And are you familiar with any cities who maybe would say you have to use an engineer of our choosing versus an engineer of the company's choosing? You know, what options do we have here?
This is not, as of yet, a provision that I have seen present a problem to any local government that I work with. We did not define qualified radio frequency engineer. Part of the reason is because it's a fairly obvious use of phrase, and radio frequency engineers aren't necessarily rare, but there are less of them than there are general professional engineers, people with the PE. And that actually was language that we put in there to give local governments a little bit more discretion. If there is a qualified radio frequency engineer that the city has worked with that you would prefer, that's who signs off on providers' RF standards, that's perfectly fine. But it could also be a regular professional engineer, a little bit of discretion there.
And can you tell us how many other municipalities or are other municipalities using this requirement currently?
All of the municipalities I work with, which has been quite a few in the past 3 years. I cannot think of all of them off the top of my head, but quite a few localities in Colorado, as well as a few that we work with across the country.
And are you aware in your experience of any issues with this requirement, or are the levels ever not certified appropriately?
I have not, as of yet, like I said, seen any issue with requesting that those radio frequency, the demonstration of compliance with radio frequency emission be signed by either a qualified radio frequency engineer or professional engineer. Where I have seen some issues is with that language I discussed about asking providers to do tests for radio frequency emissions once their sites are fully operational. That is where I have that would be a little bit of a legal risk that, again, we could discuss more fully in executive session or a memorandum.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Of course.
Any further questions from council? If not, any recommendations regarding the proposed changes, if we're good to move forward to P&Z or anything else that we would want to change before it goes to P&Z? Mayor Pro Tem?
I think the discussion regarding ongoing compliance and ensuring ongoing compliance with our regulations is worthwhile, and I would support a more enhanced discussion on that. One of the concerns that I've heard from residents is how do we know if this changes? How do we know if it remains in compliance? And right now, as I understand it, we don't really have a means of ensuring continued compliance. So I believe that we should have that discussion before this comes forward.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Anyone else? Go ahead, Member Anderson.
I'm in agreement with that. I'd like to have that discussion.
Anyone object to having that discussion? Looks like we would be in favor of having that discussion. Okay, perfect. So I think we'll get that on the agenda for here in the near future in order to have that discussion before it goes to P&Z. But go ahead,
That
Ms.
sounds
McCroskey.
great. Is that, I can work with Tamara, but if you would like us to draft some background information on that for council, just let me know.
That would be great. I think we probably would want that background information, so just to keep it simple.
That sounds like a plan.
Don't see anyone objecting to that. Anything else for Ms. McCroskey? If not, Ms. McCroskey, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
All right, we're moving to the second agenda item, which is Director of Community Development Brad Power and Planning Manager Bryan Isham here to present and discuss the Planning and Zoning Commission return to in-person meetings. Good evening, Mr. Isham.
Sorry about the crutches. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Bryan Isham, Planning Manager, Community Development. I also have along with me Jeremy King, the Director of Information Technology, Victor Raphael, the Director of Public Works, and joining us virtually is Chris Hargeth, Director of Communications. We were asked to bring an item, a study session item to you all tonight to discuss bringing the Planning Zoning Commission meetings back to in-person meetings. I don't have a presentation. This is more of a dialogue. We provided a lot of options to you all in your study session packet with information that might be needed to help bring these meetings back in person. So we wanted to bring the directors that were associated with those additional departments, not just the planning department staff or planning division staff, but the other directors up here to answer questions if you all have them. The only item I would request is if we are directed to bring the Planning and Zoning Commission back to in-person meetings. While we are having our UDC discussions, Code Next project, the UDC Steering Committee meets just before the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we would request, from Community Development, we would request that we not institute the in-person meetings until the UDC Steering Committee has gone through their process, to not interrupt that process. We also have two Planning and Zoning Commissioners in the audience behind me, Colin Haggerty and Carl Adams. as well. And with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Actually,
comments from the
Mr.
commission.
Isom, before we actually get to questions, is it possible to, there's 3 different sections that we have to consider tonight. I'm not sure who can speak to the security aspect of it, but then Director King, I think he can speak to the IT staffing issues, correct? So I'm not sure where you want to start, but
Do you want to start with security?
Director Raphael, go ahead.
Yes, Mayor, good afternoon, council. So just a quick overview with respect to security. So we priced out several options for security. Option 1 in the packet is for a city-supplied city police officer. Option 2 included allied, having an armed and unarmed guard there, estimating approximately 2 hours for the meeting, providing annual cost for both of those. You'll see the allied is slightly under the cost for a city resource. You'll also note in the write-up that is recommended by Police Chief Watson to use Allied, and that's likely due to personnel availability. We do believe Allied could supply somebody pretty readily should option 2 be the preferred option when it comes to security. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions regarding the security piece? Go ahead, Member Noonan-Kemp.
I have a question related to the increased security that the council recently just approved. We approved a roaming guard, I believe, for this floor. When does that end? Is it only from 9 to 5?
Correct. It's only during normal business hours.
Okay, thank you.
Member Woodward, did you have your light on? Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm curious about after Code Next and after we're completed with that, couldn't there be another option where P&Z would meet in person when there were public hearings and where the public is involved, and meet online like they are currently doing for their other regular meetings? Wouldn't that be, I mean, it seems to me that that would work, and it seems to me it'd be a whole lot cheaper than what we've got going in these options.
I think that is an option, but we're leaving that in y'all's very capable hands as to what they are. That's why if you when you're reading the communication, we mentioned in person or hybrid. Kind of, we just wanted to illustrate what the costs are associated with every or any in-person meetings with this
Okay.
report.
Okay, great, thank you.
Member Wink.
Thanks, Mayor. Hi, gentlemen. So what precipitated this need for revisiting the manner in which these meetings are being conducted?
I believe that came out of a recent council study session or
That,
council
okay.
meeting to request it for staff to look back into this.
So, okay, good. I think I remember that evening, to my fellow council members, a discussion around the last several rounds of applications and interviews and admissions to these boards and commissions of our citizens, resting on the understanding of the format in which they would attend those meetings. If I'm mistaken, I hope one of you can clear that up for me. But I did bring it up that evening, and I thought we discussed it. That the premise of it wasn't that we're going to meet in person, firstly, so sort of that stated expectation in terms of their engagement in the board and commission or commission. And then I you know, discussion is healthy, but I don't see how this is good use of our city resources to spend a minimum of $9,000 a year, maybe up to, actually, truthfully, up to $100,000 a year, just, you know, depending on these options, for something like this, where I don't understand the notable benefit that really outshines that spending. Just want to see what you all think. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Wink. I think the purpose of why this is bringing up tonight is that at the very least, we had a majority of council that wanted to revisit it. We're not saying that we are going to go back to in-person. Obviously, tonight we're going to give direction on whether or not that's the case, but there was a majority of council that wanted to revisit that decision. Member Woodward?
As I recall it, it came up with the number of public that had the ability to talk at the public hearing regarding, I believe it was Sam's Automotive. And that's, with the outcome of the feedback, I think that's where we started discussing this. But one of the things I'm just wondering, and some of the other boards and commissions, and I'm using as examples the boards I'm on and have been on recently in the past prior to my council election, Parks and Recreation and Malley Trust Fund, NERP, those are only recorded audibly. They're not visually. It's a recorder that you push a button when the meeting starts, and you know, if something more important happened, like a public hearing or something, then that could change, but that never happened with those three commissions over the years that I'm aware of. Thank you.
Any further questions regarding the security? Member Russell?
I don't know that I have a specific question regarding security, but prior to COVID, all of these boards met in person. We didn't even have an option for anything other than in-person meetings. And I mean, so in looking at the security, I think we need to do that. But my question is, what kind of a cost do we put on openness and transparency? We have had several complaints over the last couple months about people that have called in to the UDC committee or to planning and zoning, and they can't get in. They get connected, and then they go out because they don't have a good connection, and then they can't get back in at all. I have a huge concern that this is a quasi-judicial board making quasi-judicial decisions, and the public does not have access to them. And I think that is very important. I think the public deserves for them to have an opportunity to speak. I think also I heard from someone that Zoom meetings actually are not closed captioned and they're not available to hearing impaired, and there could be some issues for ADA compliance in using Zoom meetings. So I think that's another thing that council may need to consider. But at this point, I don't have any questions because I think they laid it out pretty well in those decisions or in the packet.
In the packet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Anything else regarding security? Do we want Director King to go through the IT section? Director King, if you could.
Thank you, Council. Good evening. So with adding more meetings to our schedule, it would strain the IT department. I mean, right now we have a network administrator and a system administrator working these meetings tonight. They do it every single Monday night, and adding another meeting along with their regular job duties that they're working at nights would actually put a strain on them. And then they wouldn't be able to do their regular jobs that they're supposed to be doing, or half the time on some weeks. So, you know, after really analyzing it, we came up with basically three options that we wanted. We came up with an option one, well, you know, to really address what we have is hiring an FTE, having a full-time employee on staff that their responsibility is the meetings. And in their responsibility, you know, we have other things that we can have that FTE do, along with getting the, you know, videos out there and really building the channel. But that person's main responsibility will be making sure that everything's working, and the IT staff that's currently working would not attend those meetings anymore. With an FTE, there will still need to have some kind of professional services, because that person will probably have vacations. We'd have to figure out backup times and people actually conducting the meetings while that person's on vacation or not. Option two, we could still use a contractor to be able to provide the hybrid environment, but that still doesn't take IT completely out of everything. We can really try to figure out how we can make that work. But since they're not a city employee, it's just access to the systems and getting the contractors to really understand, what our processes are, and make that happen. And third option is keeping them remote, keep it with no change. And we can look into the closed captioning, because a lot of the things are being required to do closed captioning on, with Zoom and Teams and all of those remote things. So we can look into how we can make those happen. So if you have any more questions, I'm here.
Go ahead, Member Russell.
Thank you. So what did we do before COVID? Because both meetings were live. The city council meeting was live, P&Z was live. What did we do then?
Before we did that, we had just a mobile unit on a tray that came out. We set that up. We just plugged it in, and then we just turned it on, and that's how it was done. That was the equipment, and we had an IT staff member manage that equipment. And now, since the equipment is more complex and actually producing the way the meetings are produced, that's beyond the skills of our current staff that we have. It's a specialized skill to actually produce kind of a video or a live event.
Thank you. Do we have different staff than we did 3 years ago?
The people that are here 3 years ago, the people that are running this meeting, no. They're the same staff that's running the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Member Noonkemp.
Thank you for the information. My question is similar to Member Russell's. I'm trying to understand how we were able to do it before and not now. And one of the pieces in our packet talks about the IT improvements that your team made, and it says in council chambers. Does it also apply to this room?
That is correct. So when we originally designed it, these rooms actually operate together. They also operate separately. And then we also have this room as more of an overflow. So if you have council meetings in the council chambers, that gets too full, we can move that into this room so it's overflow. So all the technology is integrated together in both of these rooms.
And is it possible for us to go back for just the planning and zoning meetings to the simpler system that we have the ability to run on our own for just twice a month?
We don't have that equipment anymore, because it was actually old, outdated equipment that's needed to be replaced anyways.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
If you asked for the full-time member, as you may be aware, we've experienced somewhat regular IT issues in council meetings on Monday nights over the last year and a half. Would this help that experience as well if you were to have this staff member?
Yes, that person would actually be an expert in all these systems to be able to really understand how it is and maintain the systems, and make sure that systems are operating efficiently. And then they would also have, if there's beyond them, they would have direct access to other team members that have knowledge beyond that knowledge. Because our current staff members knows the technical side, but not the real producing side. But we would make sure that this person has all the knowledge they possibly can to run effective meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from council regarding the IT? No further questions? Go ahead, Member Newcamp.
I'm sorry, I have one more. I've just been thinking through all the different ways we could make this work. Is it possible, considering planning and zoning only meets twice a month for a couple of hours, but some nights, to handle this with just a contractor or with a part-time staff member? Does it need to be a full-time staff member?
Yeah, those are options are on the table. Like option 2 was another extending the contractor thing on that. I still don't, the contract on there, or even a part-time employee. Sorry, Sean. Again, I need to know how to use these. In a part-time employee, actually, we could look at that too. That is also another option to be
Okay,
able to do
thank
that.
you.
Member Anderson?
I have a question on, well, I guess first, well, I have an IT question, but first, Mike, I have a question, maybe the city manager could answer this. At the P&Z meetings, even if there's not a public hearing, do they take public comment? Do they have a public forum? Okay, Bryan would answer that.
We do.
Sure. Okay. I was just thinking, for our Sustainability Commission meetings, we meet up in the conference room upstairs and have hybrid meetings that don't require any technician to be there and run anything. If there's not a public hearing, can we, either set up a similar system down here that could be utilized for those types of meetings, or have them meet up there perhaps where people could still come and sit in the meeting? It could be recorded and broadcast, but just by whatever staff member happens to be in the room, it's a fairly simple system in there. I don't know. I do like the idea for if there's a public hearing for the public to really be able to have the same kind of experience they have at a city council meeting. But for their regular meetings, I'm just wondering if there's a lower cost option where we don't have to run it that same level of intensity every time.
Now, that's an option that they could use that other conference room, because it's less resourceful. I mean, anybody could run those rooms. That's just because of the technology that we have in these 2 rooms. That's the reason why we would need the extra resources to run that. But
well, and could that technology be set up as an alternative system in this room?
that is correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So Director King, prior to COVID, all meetings were just audio, correct? For P&Z? There was a recording? Oh, because they were in the other room. That's right.
I looked it up to double check. You can see recordings from 2018 video. It's just that one
Okay.
solid cam.
It must be some of the ones that I looked at that don't have a recording then, because I only saw audio. So, but there was video recorded for some of these. Okay. Trying to think. I think I had a second question, but I can't think of what it is off the top of my head now. I'll defer. Go ahead, City Manager Lewis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to put a finer point on Member Anderson's question, there is no requirement for the kind of produced video that we do for City Council to also be done for Planning and Zoning. So if we wanted to, treat Planning and Zoning like the Budget Advisory Committee, Sustainability Commission, other commissions, that certainly could be done. I think that it's just kind of been a long-standing tradition that they meet in council chambers and try to have a more kind of formalized, particularly since they're quasi-judicial, but there really is no requirement for that.
Thank you, City Manager Lewis. I do remember what my other question was, and then I'll go to Mayor Pro Tem. For the full-time AV person on staff, is there a need outside of just the P&Z, what we're discussing tonight in terms of P&Z? Could it be used through communications? I know Director Hargett is on there, but would this be like a shared resource across other departments, and is there a need for it today?
That was the idea of that, is to be that shared resource, is to be able to produce videos. In other places that I've seen, let's say you guys had an event in a park where you're trying to, that would be recorded and then uploaded to the YouTube channel, and really get the videos out there and producing all the videos and rendering them together and getting them posted out there to just provide that better communication out there. Absolutely.
Thank you, Director King. Mayor Pro Tem.
It's now an appropriate time for comments. I don't have any questions.
Sure, we could just open up to comments. I may have some questions for members of the P&Z board today, but yeah, I'm not sure if anyone else does. But is anybody okay if I just ask questions of the P&Z? Mr. Haggard and Mr. Adams, are you able to come up and just kind of just speak to the current process for P&Z? Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. So Mr. Haggerty, if you want to introduce yourself, Mr. Adams, if you want to introduce yourself.
Colin Haggerty, I'm the chair of the Planning and Zoning Board Commission. Thank you.
Carl Adams, regular member.
And thank you both for coming tonight and obviously for your service to the city. I guess my question for you is just in terms of the current Zoom-only remote for P&Z, how do you feel it's coming along? I saw that there were some comments or like a questionnaire in terms of what the impact may be if we went to all in person. Just trying to figure out if you feel that this may, coming back in person would be a detriment, or if you see a positive or either way, if there's a positive or a negative coming back to in person, or if you prefer a hybrid approach or that type of thing. Just love your comments.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start and let Member Adams join in. I think having the virtual option is a great ability to allow people to participate. We might even get some more participation from some community members who might not be able to make it down in some cases. Personally, I think an in-person has a better feel for it. I think there's a lot of advantages to the in-person side, but I would be hesitant to restrict it to in-person only just because of some of the benefits that I've found from having the virtual environment. And I think also in addition to that, we did not have obviously a virtual option before COVID and things were fine. We worked through it. I don't recall exactly the format. I don't think we ever used the council chambers. I think we were almost always up in one of the rooms upstairs, and it wasn't, the public I don't think was as involved, at least in the meetings that I had been in. And so I think there's actually more opportunity for public involvement. Is it unfortunate that some of them haven't been able to access the room? I totally agree with that. And I think if we could fix those issues, maybe it would actually be the best of both worlds, if you will. I think having that option is really good. Personally, I like to be in person. I'm here tonight to, support whatever makes the most sense for everybody. But I do like the option to give people the option to be able to utilize that virtual environment.
Thank you for that, Mr. Haggerty. Mr. Adams, anything to add?
If you look at the polls in there, that pretty much explains it. Hybrid, 6:30, and it would be nice to be in the room. Upstairs, it's kind of crowded, and you can't really get a lot of people in, and it's a little confusing because it's so small of an area. To have it recorded, you need it recorded, of course, but for a public hearing, it may be just video and audio, where if it's a factor, or the financial factor, just redo the audio on it for a non-critical meeting. But the polls, they show pretty much how the commission wants to work. So.
Thank you for that, Mr. Adams. Mr. Haggerty? Yeah, I will add, I believe every P&Z meeting has a public forum at the beginning of the meeting, regardless of that. So I think whatever we did, we would have to figure that out for all of the meetings.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Any further questions for members of the committee? If not, Mayor Pro Tem, I'll pass it over to you for starting off on comments.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the benefit of a return to in-person meetings is access. Member Russell made some great comments on folks who either don't use technology, can't use technology, don't have the access to technology, or for whatever reason have some sort of issue using the technology, which could even be a covered disability. And that's an accessibility issue that presents some potential liability to the city. So that's concerning to me. So I support personally a return back to in-person. To Member Anderson's comments about, meeting in this room this night or this room this night, I would, just for the purpose of consistency, so that the members of the general public know this is where they meet, this is when they meet, this is where I go to see the meetings or participate in them. I would prefer that they meet in a room that is consistent. So council chambers, I think, fits that bill. one thing that is concerning to me is we spent, I believe, close to $250,000 on this new upgraded AV setup. And it has presented no shortage of problems. And now we are being asked to expend additional funds to ensure that we can actually use it. And I just want to point that out as a concern. I think that is problematic. I would potentially, I think my favorite option is option 2, using the contractor who's familiar with our systems already and keeping them consistently attending the meetings. The risk I see with option 1, the full-time IT staffer, first of all, I don't know this for sure, but I have a hard time believing that, supporting a couple of public meetings a week is 40 hours worth of work. But secondly, when that person is out, we're now bringing in a contractor who is potentially less familiar with the systems, and we have the same problems that we've had, that Member Neunenkamp referenced throughout the past year. The gremlins tend to come out at the least convenient times. So those are my general comments. Option 2, hybrid meetings. Those are the things that I support.
And Mayor Pro Tem, did you weigh in on the security piece? I don't think
Security, noting that the chief would prefer to use Allied, I would use Allied, and I would use an armed guard. Anytime we're using a metal detector, the person operating the metal detector needs to have a gun. Otherwise, they're sitting duck.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Anyone else want to weigh in? Go ahead, Member Anderson.
Yeah, I'm similar to Mayor Pro Tem on this. I think the meetings need to be in person. I'm not as concerned about them always being in the same room. And I guess I wanted to get a little clarity, and maybe the members of the commission. Was that the case? Were you always in the council chambers pre-COVID? Or were there meetings in other rooms? Carl, can...
They used to be upstairs, but they did move down to the chambers. And they were in a chamber till COVID hit.
Okay. I can see, to me, that can go either way. I mean, if it doesn't, for non-public hearing meetings, we meet in here sometimes, we meet in there sometimes. There's some regularity to that, but I think if it's on the agenda as to where they're meeting, if it's specifically a public hearing, then I think it would make sense to be in the council chambers. But if there's a cheaper option that still has public forum, and we have public forum at the Sustainability Commission upstairs, people come to that, so it's not impossible to accommodate visitors for that. So I prefer that. Hybrid, I think, is fine here as well, though it did kind of surprise me on the polls that 60% of the commissioners said that if it was a hybrid, they would primarily attend virtually. I think that could be problematic if you have a room, room set up and only 40% of the people are actually in the room. I'm not sure how those meetings would operate really very well under those circumstances. So I'd like to get to the place where the expectation is in person when possible. If there's extenuating circumstances, which, happen all the time, that's fine. But for people to, I think we're far enough past COVID now that we're at a place where the normal expectation of, behavior for city boards and commissions should be in person, unless there are extenuating circumstances. That's the way I would like to see us moving in that direction, recognizing that it takes a while to get recovered, get back to that kind of mentality about things. But I do think it'll go that way if you start having in-person meetings and people are, there's some people in person. There's going to be a draw to be in person. People want to be in person with the other people that they're with, especially when it's something important. I think important like this for public hearing or something. So I think maybe that would change, but kind of moving the expectation in that direction. As far as security, I'm supportive of Allied and the contractor. For now, I think we could reconsider another staff member for a future budget year, but for now, I think the contractor could handle it.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Neunenkamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm largely in support. One potential change is I believe I heard Director King say that they could meet in this room with the same tech setup that the other commissions use, the simple setup, and then we wouldn't have to pay the additional $10,000 a year. If that's an option, I would support that. I think that camera, stationary filming what's happening in this room, all of our other boards and commissions, including the other quasi-judicial ones, are also just stationary cams, I think, and also the charter ones. I think that that's fine. I don't know if it needs to be fully produced or if we need to spend that extra money. So if that's an option, I would start there actually, and do a meeting in here. This could be a regular place for them, and then have it be the hybrid. I do think not only is in person make it open to the public who maybe would like to be in person, there's something about building relationships and trust together, serving the city together. These are people who are volunteering their time, but also leaders in our community. And I think that there is an investment to be here that I think is quite valuable. But also, I know people have busy lives, people get ill, people travel for work, and the ability to continue to participate, even if you have those challenges, I think makes a lot of good sense. I also support the allied contract. And I would just say, I think from what I've heard from staff tonight and from what I saw in the memo in staff communication, is that there is some additional value to be had potentially from another video producer at the city. I'm open to that conversation. I'm just hesitant to make a staffing FTE decision outside of our regular process when this is the first we're hearing about it without a stronger kind of case, especially weighed against plenty of other good cases in other departments. And so I'm not prepared to do that tonight, but hopefully we can get it done.
Thank you, Member Nooncamp. I'll weigh in. I basically agree with everything that you said there. The extra FTE, unless we know exactly how we're going to be utilizing this FTE, that's the other aspect of it. I just don't want to add the FTE and then try to find busy work for them to fill their 40 hours, as you stated. So just having a clear plan for how we would utilize that FTE would be something I would be interested in looking at during the budget cycle. But at this point, I think the second option in terms of the contractor, I think, is probably the way to go. As you stated, if we can utilize this room with different technology, I'll be up for that as well. The other aspect of it, I'm open to the hybrid model. The one thing that we haven't mentioned before yet is just the fact that I think the remote or the virtual only meetings may have opened up our commissions to people that normally wouldn't participate within our boards and commissions. So obviously with this board being quasi-judicial and actually having a bigger, a bigger role within boards and commissions, I would want to see them back in person, but I'm perfectly okay if they decide to do a hybrid model. Obviously, I've been virtual for a couple of meetings here. I prefer to be in person, but there's just times where I'm going to have to be remote. So my preference, I guess, I think we're all basically in line in terms of where we want to go with this. Haven't heard anything different, but Member Woodward, go ahead.
Thank you. I am in agreement with Member Noonenkamp's thoughts and also the mayor's. So I'm looking at option 2 and moving forward there.
Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree with most things that have been said this evening, and I do believe with Mayor Pro Tem and Member Anderson, probably more so Member Ans, the expectation should be to be in person. And I agree with the fact that there may be times when people are sick or out of town, that perhaps it should be an option now, but the citizens have a right to address the board in person, and so I would like to see that. I agree with the assessment of the full-time employee. I think that we should be discussing that in the next budget process, and I think maybe I'm okay with when they vote and things like that, it needs to be in council chambers and then using this room. I'm on board with that. So I'm very thankful for this discussion and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. One thing, and I'll go to you, Member Noonekamp, just as clarification, I'm in support of armed guards. I know that we haven't been specifically stating that, but anybody that has weighed in on that, anybody feel differently about using unarmed guards? I guess not. So, Member Noonekamp, go ahead.
The one thing that I do want us to spend a moment discussing is when this will start. I know that there was a request from staff that this wouldn't start until the UDC is done with their work. However, considering what a big project Code Next is and how much citizen interest there is in it, I actually would like us to start thinking about the in-person before that, and that we would be able to do the public hearing for planning and zoning for Code Next in person with the hybrid. So I'd like to see if maybe we can come to another way to solve for that. I know there was an idea about maybe bumping planning and zoning back 30 minutes so people would have a chance to be here. Maybe they could do Code Next hybrid in this space if they're also going to do the meeting here. But I'm hesitant to delay the change to hybrid till after Code Next is over, considering that I think a lot of this request is people who want to engage on Code Next and haven't been able to do so in the way that they've wanted.
Thank you for that, Member Noonan-Camp. Member Russell, you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, thank you. I absolutely agree with Councilmember Noonan-Camp. And I don't know why that the UDC committee could not meet in this room, and then when that was over, the UDC committee leaves, and then just the planning and zoning is left here. So I don't know how to work out the logistics, but I'd like to see it be back to in-person soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Director King or Mr. Isham, is there any type of issues in terms of just requiring this picking up, I guess, in May, the in-person hybrid model?
We probably have to defer to Director
I think
King.
that's more of an IT.
Our team will be present,
Yes.
whether you tell us in person or virtual, but.
Director King?
My only concern would be bringing his resources with this and then with really no end in sight, because my staff is already working overtime and doing that stuff at night, and those would be my concerns. But I don't see a problem with that, of going back in May and having that discussion with the staff.
Go ahead, Mayor Protem.
Director King, you just mentioned overtime, and that actually makes a FTE analysis worthwhile. If we're paying overtime in an amount that matches or approaches an FTE, that's indicative that we have the wrong headcount. So I think we should look at that as a possibility, but I would need some additional analysis to figure out exactly what we need to do there.
My staff is actually salary, so they don't get paid overtime. They don't get paid anything extra that they're doing. We do try to comp that time, absolutely. But I mean, if they're working right now, they're currently doing 10 hours a week, preparing for this meeting, everything in the morning and then starting at 3:30 to do the meeting. That's 10 hours a week. I'm only getting 30 hours of them working, but yet they also are focused on the security of our systems, and they're working, late on weekends and at nights to actually do updates on our systems, and they're already doing that stuff. So, and it's their comp times, they can't really use their comp time because those are the extra things that they're doing.
Right, and
on our systems.
that would indicate to me that we may have a problem that we need to discuss a little further, depending on what those comp time numbers look like and how many hours they're working on average. But I don't have enough information to make a determination on that right now. So that would be helpful informing the discussion in the future.
Member Noonan-Camp?
I have a question about the staffing, because to Member Anderson's point, the other boards and commissions are able to live stream their meetings or to have the video without the need for IT staff. I believe you mentioned that we could do that similar system here in this room. Is that correct?
I would have to verify this room, but it also becomes a training in here, because a lot of the times we get requests to say, I need you present at this meeting in case something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of the requests, because a lot of the people are not comfortable with using the systems, and they don't want their meetings to go awry or go somewhere down at the deep end and they want them to go perfectly. So they ask for our assistants to do that stuff. So I would have to look at this technology. It's been a while since we did that.
And if we were able to increase the contract with the audiovisual contractors, and there's planning and zoning or community development staff here for that meeting, would IT staff also be needed if we have the contractor and the other staff?
It depends on the contractor that we use, and that's really where I want to explore with, is the contractors and what is their ability and what can they do and perform for that job. But as it sits right now at this moment, we would still have to have some oversight and set up the meetings and get that going on that side.
Okay.
So Director King, I think I'm still a little bit confused. So within the packet, it is stated that the preference is to start once the UDC steering committee is, fulfilled its role and no longer meeting. So when is that? Was that expectation June, July? When would we? I guess I'm trying to understand when would we be ready to, go with the hybrid or the in-person model?
So we weren't looking at a specific timeline, only that the UDC steering committee, which is made up primarily of planning and zoning commissioners, meets the hour before. If they have to only meet for an hour, which right now some of our discussions can be 2 to 3 hours long, we have to shorten those meetings, which shortens the amount of time the steering committee has to do their work. So that's the issue that we have as a staff on these, is we're shortening the amount of time that the steering committee is working on the UDC, which is not something that it has sounded like we want to do, just to accommodate for the in-person meeting. Right now, a lot of our planning and zoning commission meetings get canceled because we don't have any business at the commission. So we're kind of functioning off that so we can press through with the UDC and have more time for our steering committee to review. So that's why we put that recommendation in there, is so that the steering committee has time to do their work, and then we could go through the planning and zoning process. Honestly, if it's approach from y'all that you want to start with the UDC or the UDC adoption or Code Next adoption as a public hearing, I think we can, at least from a planning standpoint, I think that we could definitely accommodate something like that. But as far as starting, at our very next meeting, I think it's going to depend on what we can get together with IT and what we can get to work. But that's our biggest concern, is that we're going to press the steering committee kind of up against the wall to really push them to either, it may help to make some decisions, but also it can cause some issues with shortening our meetings and our discussions with them.
Mr. Haggerty, is there something you want to add?
I do want to make sure that if we go to at least a hybrid for the UDC meetings, I think that's an essential. We have people that are out of town as part of our team that is working on this. I think that would be the minimum that we'd want to do. I think having it open to people coming in person to be able to have those conversations is great, but I wouldn't want to make sure that we were at least having a hybrid option. Just want to make sure I was clear on that.
Member Anderson.
Is there, Mr. Isham, any reason we couldn't have the UDC steering committee meeting in person in the same room that the commission would then meet, and allow that the UDC committee to go long if there was no business that night? I mean, if they're both hybrid, then you have that flexibility. But if they're both in person, don't you also have that flexibility?
So we generally end the UDC steering committee right before 7 at the start of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, because we've advertised that meeting for a specific time. We don't want to take up anybody else's time watching steering committee that's waiting for a specific item on the Planning and Zoning Commission. But as Colin said, there's 5 members of that steering committee that are not on P&Z. We didn't poll that group to ask them about returning to in-person, so we don't know what their thoughts are. But we do know that some of them, may have an issue getting back here, prior to 6, as Colin mentioned.
Thank you.
All right. Any other feedback from members of council? I would like to see us I am in agreement that I would like to see this start as soon as possible. And let me know if members of council, or if you're in disagreement with this. But keep us posted in terms of the staffing issues that potentially may keep us from going live. But I would love to see us have a meeting in May in person or hybrid if possible. So Member Noonan-Camp.
I'm sorry, just one more comment here. I want to be clear, and it was in our packet that your staff is working overtime, and it is always concerning to me when our staff is working late on Mondays. Obviously, we're all here late, and that time is not being flexed across the week, and I'm concerned about that. I would support, especially if we can do this in the near term, what's the minimal viable product. What can we get to? If it's us meeting upstairs in the conference room, planning and zoning on a technology that is simple and that doesn't require IT staff to be there late, then I think that's a really easy solution for us. And then maybe we use the contractor and the additional staff when we need to do a public hearing downstairs and we have more members of the public. But I definitely don't want to say, just figure it out with the staff you have. I want to support the contractor. And if we can go upstairs, maybe it's not ideal, but it's a solution in the near term that I think we can do.
I'm in agreement with that. So, any further comments from members of council? If not, Mr. Haggerty, Mr. Adams, thank you very much for coming and speaking to us tonight. Director, I just forgot your name all of a sudden. Mr. Isham, Director King, and Director Raphael, thank you very much. And also, thank you very much for bringing this back to tonight. I know you guys worked hard to get the numbers and everything in place for us tonight instead of in May, so I really appreciate your hard work on that. So thank you. Moving on to the next item, it's South Platte renewal in Inglewood. Oh, there we are. Inglewood Utilities Director Peter Van Rye here to discuss the pipeline injection system update. Director Van Rye.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I'm here as the Director of South Platte Renew. Over the last several months, there's just been some, I think, confusion out there in the community as it relates to the pipeline injection system, which is our biogas system. And I know we provide an update every year annually at the joint councils meeting. But we thought it'd be a good time to go into more detail this time around, really get into how we generate funds through that process, and then how those funds are accounted and ultimately save everybody money on their sewer bills. And so that's what we're going to go through tonight. With me tonight is Jamie Sofoko. She's our Deputy Director of Engineering. And in the audience is Casey Allard, who's Deputy Director of Business Solutions, as well as Bryan Schmerber, who's our midstream process engineer at South Platte Renew. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to turn this over to Jamie to start, and then she'll turn it back over to me.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. So just a quick overview of the pipeline injection system. Right here is a aerial view of our digester system. So we have a byproduct biogas that comes through and then is treated through the first part, which is the biogas treatment skid. Tail gas, which is a reject component of it with the impurities of the gas, then goes to our regenerative thermal oxidizer, or RTO, to be combusted off. And then the third main component of the pipeline injection system is this Xcel energy transfer station. This is really where we make sure that it's at RNG standards, that it's meeting all of Xcel's components, and is then traded over into an Xcel pipeline. So just a quick history of the pipeline injection system. This started back in 2016 when we did a biogas feasibility study. There's a lot of different alternatives that you can do when it comes to biogas treatment, but it was determined that the best alternative for us was pipeline injection. This was mainly due to the close proximity to the Xcel pipeline. It's actually right outside of our fence line, which is pretty limiting for other utilities, but really worked really well for our process. We began design of the system in 2017. It was about a year-long design and about a 2-year-long construction in 2018 to 2019. We became the first pipeline injection system in Colorado starting October, Halloween, I remember it very specifically, in 2019. And we have been injecting RNG into the pipeline since 2019 to present day. So just looking back on the funding component of this project, this was all cash funded by the enterprise fund, so there was no debt or bonds that were done for this project. It was a 50-50 between City of Inglewood and City of Littleton. And you can see in this table here all of the different components and contracts that went into the original project, which totaled about $7.8 million for these projects, or for the total project. Starting from, again, that feasibility all the way through construction, Xcel, sampling, all of it. So this is just kind of going overview of how funds kind of go through the system. So at South Platte, we treat the gas to RNG standards. It's then injected into the Xcel Energy pipeline. There we have what's called an operating balance agreement, or an OBA, which really is strict requirements on the gas quality as well as quantity. So we make sure that we are sending the right volume of gas as well to Xcel. That's monitored very closely. And these are all based on tariff regulations, which is a federal standard for pipeline injection. We then, it's passed off to our energy broker. We use an energy broker called Anew, and there's 3 different ways that we get revenue from the gas. The first is this RIN, which is the Renewable Identification Number, which is a renewable gas program. There's also the LCFS, which is the Low Carbon Fuel Standard, which is a California market. And then there's just the price of that, what we call raw gas or brown gas, which also has a value to it. So Anew then basically has a strategy in order to sell RINs, the brown gas, or go into the LCFS credits. And what's cool about the RINs and the programs, and what's a great benefit of having a broker, is that they strategize on when's the best place and time to sell those RINs. So you can store those RINs up to a certain amount of time and sell them when the market is higher. Before we see anything, there is a third-party verification fee. So this is something that is done by the EPA to make sure that there's no fraud or anything like that with the gas, as well as our broker fees from Anew. So those fees and costs are taken off before we see that bill, which then is our total gross receivables. So this is looking at the RIN value, because again, the RIN is the most of the revenue that we get from the system. You can see from this graph that we've seen as low as 81 cents for a RIN, as high as $3.59, and where it sits today is $2.40. So you can see during COVID time, so then in 2020, it was kind of a low market for RINs. That was due to the oil and gas market, but it did recover in 2021 and 2022. Our gross receivables were a little bit lower in 2020 as well, because we decided to store some of the RINs in order to get a higher value. Again, 85% of the gross revenue or receivables are from the RIN program, 12% is from the actual product gas or the brown gas, and 3% is from this LCFS program. At this time, it's not cost effective for us to be part of it, but it's something we monitor closely in order to get the best value for the gas. So then we go into our O&M costs, our operations and maintenance costs. So our gross receivables then go into 2 types of O&M costs. We have fixed costs, which is something we look at every single year. We have an annual compliance sampling that we have to do to make sure that we're meeting all standards for Xcel. We also have certain process sampling that we do on a monthly basis just to make sure that the skid is up and running properly. Preventative maintenance activities, which include oil changes, compressors, spare parts, and things like that. And then every year we do a big media change to make sure that the hydrogen sulfide, which is that big tank in the beginning, is getting out all the sulfide so it doesn't foul any of our membranes or things like that. We also have variable costs, which include electricity, natural gas, and some components of labor. So again, that varies depending on the year. Taking that into account from our gross receivables, that equates to our net profit, which is then what we use for our net payback projections. So this is a high-level overview of our operating costs. So when Corolla did the first evaluation back in 2016, it was estimated that we would have around $500,000 of operating costs per year. This is something that we monitor very closely. So the total bar graph, the blue plus the gray, equals 537 in 2020, 626 in 2021. So you can see those variable costs plus those fixed operating costs. This is something that we are looking really to optimize the system. So how can we lower these costs and make sure that we are getting the best value? And this is something, again, being the first in the country, in Colorado, to be doing this, that there are some things that we just don't know that we've had to learn. And we have so much to share to any type of utility that is going through this type of process. But it's something that we're going to focus on and really try to get down in the years to come. Now I'll pass it over to Peter.
Okay, so we'll run through here how the money gets from when we originally produced the gas to ultimately where the 2 cities see it in their sewer fund balance. So the first step in that is SPR reviews and confirms a statement that was provided from Anew, which is basically how much gas that they've sold. We verify that from a QA/QC perspective, and then what we end up doing is we generate an invoice back to them that they essentially pay through a wire transfer to the City of Englewood's finance department. At that point in time, SPR goes in, does a journal entry within the finance system to apply a payment for the resource recovery revenue, and then the finance department then splits that resource recovery revenue 50-50 between the two cities, which ultimately then reduces the amount of charges back to the city for treatment. So what it does is the money comes into the city's finance, and then it lowers the amount that is charged to the sewer enterprise funds, ultimately for the treatment process at the plant. So here's what it looks like for 2022. And these are draft financials that we're going through the auditing process right now, but we're told that these are fairly close. So last year, our total expenses at South Platte Renew were just under $31 million. And you can see the 6 different ways that we generate revenue to cover those expenses. And so the top is resource recovery. That is the pipeline injection. So that's $2.686 million for last year, for 2022. Miscellaneous income is we have the leases for the farms out east, so we lease that land, so that's some revenue. We have septic haulers that pay to discharge at our septic station, and so there's this other revenue that we generally budget about $440,000 for. That's also revenue that comes off the top that is directly related to SPR. Then you can see a 50-50 split between the two cities for a capital expense, and that's our total. So our total capital expense to the two cities in 2022 was just over $12 million. And then the disposal expense, which is based on the flow rate, so that's the variable amount. There's a little bit more to Englewood because we have a higher population coming to South Platte Renew versus Littleton, where there's a little bit lower. So the split's about 46-54, so 46% Littleton, 54% Englewood, and you can see what those numbers, what they translate to. So those are essentially the costs to treat the wastewater. Ultimately, all that adds up and equals our total expenses. As we're looking at the biogas system, I know one of the points of great interest is when does this pay for itself? And so we've been tracking, and if you look at the data that Jamie provided, which includes all of our revenue and all of our costs, we are tracking when we think we'll be at a break-even point with this system, and then the time past that point, this is generating profit for the two cities. And so right now, based on, you can see a fixed RIN price there that on a high end is $3.60 per RIN, a low end of $1.95 per RIN. You can see that payback window where we break even is somewhere between Q2 of 2024, so about a year from now, to Q3 of 2026, which is a little over 3 years from now. And so the original estimates were 4 to 7 years. And again, we're working in a commodities market, and so we don't have price certainty or price control. But based on what we estimate from a payback window, we're still within that 4 to 7 generally in terms of a payback period. And so we think those are pretty good estimates from a high and a low, but like anything, it's a petroleum market, and the bottom could drop out or it could skyrocket through the roof. So we're estimating the best we can. We also have an environmental performance associated with this. So what we send into the pipeline injection system, we do not flare off into the atmosphere on the Front Range. So if you watch any of the news lately, you can see where the Front Range air quality is getting worse and worse. This is the two cities' step towards helping incrementally that air quality, because we no longer we basically divert gas that is coming out, fossil fuels, and utilizing our naturally recurring biogas. So on this, you can see that since the inception of the program, we have generated 233 million cubic feet of RNG, which has an offset of about 31 million car miles. Now, we put this in car miles because we participate in a transportation program. And so those programs are, our gas goes into offset transportation petroleum products. And so we always equate this to car miles. However, as it relates to what does that really mean in terms of homes, annually the natural gas that we produce is enough to heat 1,400 homes in our service area on an annual basis. And so just in terms of how much gas we're producing through the system in this recovery system, it equates to 1,400 homes that that gas is not being pulled out of the ground. And so with that, we will open it up to questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Mayor Pro Tem.
One of the fundamentals that I don't understand here is what a RIN is, because the product is the gas, but that's not the product that we're profiting from. We're profiting from what this seems to be this phantom idea product called a RIN, but the gas is what goes in, and the RINs are worth 7 times what the gas is worth. So can you explain to me a little bit what this program is and why anybody would invest in it and where the money comes from?
So I'm gonna start, and then I'm gonna turn this over to Jamie. So this is an EPA program, and what this EPA program is trying to do is it's trying to drive the viability of renewable gas projects. And so we are one of the early adopters. The 2 cities are one of the early adopters in this, and so we are able to access that program that helps us generate revenue to offset the costs associated with creating these types of programs or these types of projects. And so it's essentially a federally funded program that we are tapping into and getting the access from in order to generate revenue for our system and then ultimately improve the air quality in the Front Range. Did I miss anything on that?
No, the only thing that I would add is that there's an MMBTU, which is the energy content of the gas, which equates to a RIN. So it's almost like a cost value, but that's how the amount of volume equates to a dollar amount, I guess.
So would it be fair to sum it up then by saying that the federal government is paying people to buy a product which would otherwise be too expensive to purchase on the open market or not economically viable to produce?
Yeah, so I would say that that's a fair way to put it. So if we were just selling the raw gas, you don't make money to ever pay it back. But because the federal government wants to drive the development of this type of technology, and South Platte Renew, City of Englewood, City of Littleton were in on the early end of this, we are deriving the benefit of that federal program and pulling those funds directly into our 2 cities to offset our sewer bills.
Great, thank you.
Member Russell?
Oh, shoot.
Thank you. I just would like to add what RINs are renewable energy credits. It is based on a futures market, and it is unstable. It could go away. One of my questions is, how many, is this at the bottom of the payback analysis, these figures that the $500,000 in 2020, the 2 million, and the 4.1 million up through 2022, have we actually sold RINs? Do we actually have that much money? But that's divided by 2 because we split the $8 million equally between Englewood and Littleton.
That's correct. So whatever revenue is generated through the project right now is split 50-50. As soon as we pay the project off, it switches to operational. And so it ends up in that instance, Englewood would receive 54% and Littleton would receive 46%. Because the first step was paying off the capital investment that the 2 cities paid in. And then it becomes an operational thing, just like flow is operational and biosolids that we apply on the farms are operational. They're more generated from the more users of Englewood, just like there's more gas generated from the users of Englewood through this process.
Okay, thank you. And then on the financial workflow page that you went through, is it possible for council to get the accounting spreadsheet for each individual year that takes it from 1 all the way through 6?
I think so. I think we'll check with finance, but I think so.
Okay. And how much RINs do we have banked right now?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get you that value. So.
Okay, and have we banked them right now because the price has dropped from the high, or do you know why the broker makes that decision?
So they kind of give us a projection of what they think is going to happen with the RIN market, if it's going to go high or low, and sell it accordingly. So they share the forecasting and the methodology, and then usually go do it themselves. So and then give us the statement later.
Okay, thank you. And then just one other question. On the page where it has the balance sheet and so that almost $31 million, that's the overall amount, but that's the overall budget for that year, correct, for 2022? That's correct. And then we just take the resource recovery off the top and
That's correct. I'll go back to this. All right. So essentially, if we had to have a resource recovery project, all of those numbers that you see to the below that, with the exception of miscellaneous, we'd have miscellaneous income at the top. So again, that's farm leases and septic haulers. But that $2.6 million would be spread through those 4 charges to the 2 cities. So it'd be about 1.34 million additional charges to the 2 cities, distributed between capital and operating, based on what the total project amount was. Well, actually, in this instance, because these are replacing recovery, that 1.34 would actually be take that capital charge, and without the recovery system, it'd be 7.37. So the capital charge would go up by 1.3 million to each city. What the resource recovery is doing is it's knocking that down to 6 million, because it's just revenue in that's offsetting what would be charged.
okay, so we didn't finance this. Did we have the 4 million cash back in the beginning?
The city of Englewood didn't. Yeah, both cities did not finance
Littleton
this.
had a lot more than we did, I think.
Yeah, both cities did not. My understanding, because this happened right before I got here, but both cities did cash fund this.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, but until it gets all paid off, we're still in the hole because we haven't recouped the money that we've spent.
That is true, and I think your statement that it's a futures market and it's volatile and it's a commodities market, there is risk to it, but I think the fact that there is such there's political will for this on both sides. You get both parties that are interested in this type of program, because it helps both farmers and dairy farmers and people like us, the communities that have biogas systems. It also helps with landfill recovery. There's gas that comes off a landfill. And so because of that bipartisan support, this is generally a program that appears to be one that has a lot of continued future support, I guess. So we're looking at that 1 to 2 year mark before we break even, and then at that point in time, the project will have cost us essentially, we will have paid for the project. And if we can get back to that, if we can get to that point in the next year or two, then we're really at a point where this thing is just starting generating money, because the 2 cities were forward looking to access a program where money was available.
Right. Now, however, just to remind everyone, because I was on council when the decision was made, there was a company that would have immediately started paying us. We didn't have to take any of the risk. The company was taking the risk. So hopefully it turns out the way that it was projected. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the update.
Member Woodward?
Thank you. On the RIN, does the EPA guarantee that program for a certain amount of time, or does it end at some point? How long does it go?
Good question. I think I think the Congress is the one that continues to support the ongoing nature of this. So they vote to appropriate the funding for that program through the EPA. And that's where I think when you look at the bipartisan support for this program, it continues to be funded. Now, nothing's guaranteed, but right now it appears to be something that both parties like.
Yeah, I would think right now that it's something that it's probably very interesting. I mean, everybody's very interested and wants to go forward with it. I saw a real interesting news thing this morning about a dairy farm that was milking 1,000 cows a day 3 times. And they had some sort of methane gas program for them. And I thought, yeah, I'll bet they do. Although they said they couldn't explain it on TV, so it was kind of interesting.
They are our competition. In reality, that's what's happening is the dairy farms are actually catching up on this, and they're starting to access these programs as well, which is to some degree pushing other wastewater plants in the U.S. into a wait list. And so because we got in at the front end, we're in the program where there are other communities across the U.S. right now that want to participate in the RIN program, but they're on a wait list because dairy farms and landfills are taking up the slots.
Good. I mean, I'm glad we're there. Thank you.
Director, this is all great. Thank you for the environmental breakdown as well. I guess the one question I happen to have is just, do we ever check the performance of the broker in terms of if they're holding the RINs? Are we checking to see if they're actually right in terms of their analysis? Is this the time to buy or excuse me, this is the time to sell? I'm just kind of curious if for that aspect. Go ahead, Deputy Director.
So Bryan Schmerber, our process midstream engineer, he meets with our broker, every month to go over evaluations, the RINs, and things like that. We could do a separate audit, and some utilities have decided to do the RIN program themselves, which I think inherently does have some risk to it as well, because it's a totally different skill set, I think. But it is something that we keep in a lot of really close contact with them to make sure that we are getting the best value.
And do we have any say in when we sell?
As far as like when and why?
Yeah, so if they're making a recommendation in terms of holding until February of 2024, do we say no, let's get this December 23 for whatever reason? I'm just kind of curious if we play a role in terms of the decision making on selling it.
We haven't to this point.
Okay.
We've put our trust in Anu and kind of QA/QC'd them thus far. But I can evaluate the contract to see what kind of leeway or say we do have.
Okay, perfect. Member Russell, you have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you. So my question is that on the raw gas, that Xcel Energy, we have standards we have to meet. Are we meeting those standards?
Yes, we are meeting our standards. So it is connected to this crazy analyzer. I can never say it right, spectrometer. And so it has a ton of different analytes that it's evaluating. And if we're not meeting any of those, the valve closes. And so then we are not injecting into Xcel. It then has to go to the flare. And to this point, we haven't had that happen.
So are we getting some money then from the raw gas or?
We are. So it is a smaller percentage than the RINs, but there is a value to that as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's actually a really small amount. I think it's like $40,000 a year. So there is a revenue to it, but the real money in this program is the RINs.
Member Woodward, do you have another question or?
Yes, I do. When you say over time on the RINs, do we pay for storage then of that natural gas, or how does that work?
So it's not like physical storage of the natural gas. It's like you're putting it almost into like a savings account of RINs, and then you would sell those RINs at a different time.
So it's almost like a virtual type thing.
Yes, that's the best way I can explain it. And at this point, there's not a cost to us. So the broker does have a say in a percentage. They get a percentage of the income or what they sell, and so there is an incentive for them to sell it at the best time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the physical gas does not get stored. It's an accounting process that we time the pricing through them to ensure that we maximize the best revenue for that gas. I think was the duration a year? Can we hold it a year? Is that about right?
Yeah, we haven't held it longer than a year, but we haven't had a need to. But we can find out how long we can store it.
Great, thanks.
Any further questions from members of council? Seeing none, Deputy Director Sepulko and Director Van Ryn, thank you very much for your time tonight and for the presentation. Always great to talk about biogas. So.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right, everyone, we are going to be taking a 10-minute break. It is about 7:41, so we'll meet back up at 7:51. All right, members of council, we are back. We are back with the Director of Finance, Jackie Loh, here to request guidance from City Council regarding the 2024 budget process. Good evening, Director Loh.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. I will review with you the 2024 revenue and expenditure assumptions and ask your input on the 2024 budget process. So I'm going to break down today's presentation into 5 sections. The last one is the reference sections for your reference. And the first one is the budget planning, some external, internal factors, and our assumptions for general fund, and the 5-year expenditure revenue for 2024 to 2028. And I also want to show you the fund balance for the following 5 years. And I also want to show you all the fund balance for all funds, including enterprise funds. This is the calendar. In January, we had a vision goal setting workshop with council talking about our strategic plan. And today we're going to review the revenue expenditure assumptions and asking for input. So next week, we are going to review with you the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan prioritization process, our ranking system. And April 24th, we are going to have a joint meeting for all the CIP, including all the board, commissions, and committees. So April is heavy CIP budget month. Then the staff is going to present a 2024 operating and staff prioritized capital requests the last week of June, June 26th. Then the next one will be staff presenting the proposed 2024 operating capital budgets on August 14th. And we'll have public hearing, proposed public hearing for September 18th, then 2 readings. First readings October 2nd and second reading October 16th. We also list the input required from other committees. For example, Planning and Zoning Commission, Library Board, Transportation Advisory Committees, ETAC, Parks and Rec Commission, and Budget Advisory Committee need to submit their CIP proposal to council before June 8th. And also, the board commission committees will provide their annual report to council by July 31st. So this is the budget calendar. I also want to talk about the Colorado economic indicators. We received this information from the Colorado Legislative Council at the end of 2022. So you can see of all the inflationary factors, food and housing affect Colorado the most. Food price inflation has eased a little in recent months. Housing prices surged in 2022 by 19%. The prices decreased during the summer because of rising interest rates. So you can see these are the CIP adjustments by categories for Colorado. This is also economic indicators we received from Colorado Legislative Council. I want to direct your attention to the last line, Denver, Aurora, Lakewood inflationary adjustment. So 2021, the CPI is 3.5%, 2022, 8%, 2023, 4.9%. I also want to bring you back in 2021 to see what the Colorado Legislative Council's projection. For 2021, they said the CPI was 2.7%. 2022, 2.5%, 2023, 2.2%. So you can see 2022 was really a anomaly, totally just exceeded our expectation. So just want to give you reference to see what the projection in the past and what's the reality. And this is the one we're talk about external factors. If you recall, we have a slide prepared for you in the reference section. The Federal Reserve has increased the interest rates 9 times since March 2022. The current interest rate is 4.75%. Also, consumer spending continues, but at a slower pace, changes focus from goods to service post-COVID. You probably all heard the term revenge spending after COVID. That really affect the 2022 financial picture. The supply chain is improved, disruptions easing, may stabilize prices. Then we all heard the workforce supply. There are a few buzzwords around workforce, like great resignation, reconsideration, quiet quitting, and quiet hiring. But we feel hopefully the workforce supply will improve. Also, geopolitical events still going on after a year. So these are external factors affect the prices. And also there's a recent banking turmoil. We all heard Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, all went bankruptcy, but the Fed Reserve and FDIC have different plans for these bankruptcies, including Europe. The Credit Suisse when bankruptcy was purchased by USB. So these are external factors that will affect not only the nationwide economy and also affect Inglewood. The next one I want to review with you are internal factors related to compensation, insurance, and TIF, our tax increment financing. If you recall, we reserved $1.7 million in contingency fund for our class compensation study. At this juncture, because inflationary effect, we are going to increase all employee groups, increase their salaries by 2%. The impact on the general fund is approximately $700,000, other funds $400,000. So this, we're thinking to bring another budget amendment to council on May 1st related to inflationary wage adjustments. Then what's the rest? We will take the time to complete the class account study. So you can see the potential budget impact is 1.7 million for general fund minus 700,000. So the difference, we're estimating $1 million, but it may be lower than that. The third internal factor is COLA adjustment. We're thinking currently we are estimating 5% increase for COLA across all the groups. The impact on the general fund is around 1.7 million, other funds 900,000. So we just want to list these assumptions and internal factors asking for input. Insurance, at this juncture, just a placeholder. We're thinking if we increase healthcare insurance by 10%, the impact on general funds probably 350,000, other fund 230,000. But property casualty liability is probably 7.5%. And also last year we remit a little bit over 300,000 to EDDA because TIF, we're estimating the same. So please note the estimate amount is based on 2023 budget plus the budget supplemental number 1. Let's take a look at the revenue expenditure assumptions for general fund. I want to review the 2023 original budget and what our estimated 2023 numbers look like. If you recall, the beginning balance for 2023 is 18.2%, revenue 61.4, which is a 4.5% increase from 2022. Then we have appropriations, then transfer out original $1 million for the capital project council approved. The $134,000 is for debt service payment on this building. So the 2023 estimated year-end fund balance is $16.6 million. After probably 7 months, how do we look like? The beginning balance for 2023 is 23.9%. 23.9 million, which is a 5.7 million increase. We're going to tell you what has happened because the sales use tax is 16.7% higher than the budget. This is really an anomaly. And also want to give you, so what do we estimate how we will end 2023 with revenue. How did we arrive at the 66 million? That's based on the 2022 unaudited financial. We add an additional 1.7 million increase over the 2023 original budget, which is 4.4%. And plus the 2022, the voters approved the sales use tax rate increase. That's add additional 2.9 million. So the 4.6 million additional revenue consists of the 2.9 million from sales use tax increase and 1.7 million additional from our 2023 original budget. And let's take a look at the estimated expenditure for 2023. The difference is 3.6 million. Where does that 3.6 million come from? Of that, 2 million contributed to the budget supplemental number 1, and the 700,000 is for the inflationary wage adjustments I just reviewed with council. If you want to see what a budget supplemental 1 consists of, you can see the footnote, 2 million for the street maintenance, 254,000 related to library staffing, 575,000 for enhanced police staffing for 5 positions, 79,000 for ARPA homeless related projects and a coordinator positions. So that's give you. Then where the net transfer out 3.3 million consists of, that's additional 1.1 plus 2.1 million transfer to PIF as council approved in budget supplemental number 1. Then what does this mean? Because we show you the estimate year-end fund balance for 2023 in 21.1 million. What is the breakdown, the composition of the 2023 estimated year-end fund balance? So of the 21.1, the table emergency reserve, which is 3% of the revenue, which is equivalent to 2.1 million. The labor committed, I think later fund is 97,000, this does not change. ARPA restricted, we still have a 300,000 in general fund that to be spent down. When we did the 2023 budget, we thought the whole ARPA funding will be spent or committed, but we know we still have a 300,000 yet to be spent. The unrestricted reserve, 16.7% revenue has increased because the estimated increase. Total designated amount, so you can see unassigned fund balance estimated is around 7.6 million, which is an increase from the original budget submitted. And so we covered the 2023 estimates in terms of revenue, expenditures, and fund balance. Let's talk about what does it look like the following 5 years from 2024 to 2028. This is a very interesting graph. You can show this is 2012 to 2022 unaudited compound annual growth rate. You can see revenue increase, expenditure increase in the past 10 years from 2012 to 2020. We also broke this down from 2012 to 2017 to 2017 to 2022. So you can see from 2027, 2022, the estimate the average general fund revenue growth of 6.6%. 2022 is really totally changed our average. The expenditure is 5.8%. But from 2012 to 2017, the average revenue increased 3.3%, the expenditure 1.5%. So you can see the combined total revenue in the past 10 years, revenue increase is probably 4.8%, expenditure 3.6%. Then you can also see the CIP, corresponding CIP during the time frame. I also asked staff to break down our revenue by sales use tax, other, and the property tax. So you can see the previous 10 years for sales use, other, and property tax, and from 2012 to 2017, and last 5 years. and how the 2022 number skews some of the average. Just remember the odd year is an assessed year for property tax, so that property tax revenues are higher in the odd years. So this is our projection for 2024. So we're thinking sales use tax revenue increased by 3%. 2024 is an odd year, so we're expecting a 14% increase for property tax revenue. Other revenue, 2%. Expenditure, we broke this down by personnel and non-personnel. Non-personnel is tentatively estimated at a 5% increase. Non-personnel is 3.5%, which is the same as a CPI adjustment forecasted by the Colorado Legislative Council. This is not a way to see the general fund, the past 5 years average. You can see the revenue composition. 2022 really also changed the number. So sales use tax take up 60% of our total revenue. Property tax, probably 8.2%. The rest of the fees, 13%, and intergovernmental other, 10.4%. So the 2022 is an anomaly because after COVID, overspending, and also COVID surprise, our sales use tax is over 16.7% over 2022. And also 2022 will all receive a TABOR refund early. Each individual $750 and household $1,500. We feel these factors all contribute to the abnormal increase from 2022 sales use tax. So we are hoping for the composition. Property tax probably can carry a little more weight. If we could increase the composition for property tax to 10%, that would really probably better balance our revenue composition. This is another way to show our revenues, property tax, and the sales use tax in the past from 2018 to projection to 2028. Okay, see the breakdown. This is the 5-year average of expenditures. 71% expenditures go to departments that provide direct services, including police, parks and rec, library, and the public works, and a fire emergency management. The non-direct services, probably 25.3%. The debt services seems high, 3.7 million, because we have been paying the COP office balance in the past 5 years. In the future, it will be much lower. We only pay the $134,000. This is another way to see our expenditures, see how far we have grown from 2018 and the projection for 2028 with a compound annual growth rate 3.33%. Also want to let council know for the revenue, the staff created a rated fee comparison matrix to compare the city's rates and fees to the municipalities close to us. So we're going to review this rates and fees at our quarterly meeting with department and also during the 2024 budget review process to encourage departments to look at their fees, to modernize their fees and streamline their fee structure. Okay, so this is a fund balance forecast. You can see for 2022, our unaudited financial statements, you can see the sources are much higher than the uses. 2023 budget, we have a balanced budget by allocating some of the proceeds from the sale of the Bronco Stadium to balance our budget. 2023 estimates based on our new projections, we should have some surplus. And in the following 5 years, we're thinking the recurring revenues can cover recurring expenditures based on assumptions. You can see that's another way to see our surplus shortfall, 2023 budget, 2023 estimate. Then you can see 2026, 2028, we have a higher surplus because these are assessed years. We have higher property taxes. This is another way to see our fund balance composition from 2018 to 2028. You can see that the unrestricted reserve, that section of the bar have been very stable, very rich. So you can see we have very healthy unrestricted reserve from 2028, and we will stay the same up to 2028. This is also 2023, 2022 estimated year-end balance for other funds. So you can see the first column is the beginning balance. Second column B is budgeted sources coming in and budgeted uses. You can see ending balance. For some of the some of the funds, if they cannot finish their capital projects, their budgeted uses may decrease, so they may have a higher balance. So you can see the balance for other funds, construction trust, donor, parks and rec trust, and the police general obligation bond. That's for their debt service, that's supposed to be zero. Public improvement fund, capital project fund, and police building construction fund, that's the bond proceeds. And you can see water, sewer, if they can spend down all the money for the capital project, golf course fund, civic center, risk management. So this is just a estimate for other funds. This concludes my presentation. I'm asking for council's input and if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Director Loh, for the presentation. Any questions for members of council? Go ahead, Member Nunekamp.
Thank you for the presentation. I was especially interested in the fiscal responsibility slide where we show growth of revenue and expenditures over time. And I appreciated that you included not only our average over the last 10 years, but as well as what I believe is from some of our neighbors, Denver, Aurora, and Lakewood. Is there any data or generalization in municipal finance expertise around an appropriate level of growth over time? Are there kind of standard, cities are either frankly growing or shrinking. There's really no static in between, that we grow, we serve new challenges, we serve new residents. How should we think about that incremental growth over time?
Let me repeat your question, make sure I understand correctly. So are you thinking our comparison to the other municipalities close by and see if we are in a healthy trend compared to other municipalities?
Are there other municipalities, or is there just a general, is this normal for most cities to grow at this rate?
We can see if we can find some information from Colorado Municipal League, or if GFOA, if they have some similar question to see the projection. I know one of the municipality close to us, like our sales use tax increased by 16.7% in 2022. I know there's 11%, but I know the majority of our increase comes from outside city jurisdictions. If every month we review the financial with you with the sales tax map, I think our sales use tax a lot, probably 40% come from outside. It might be it's higher compared to other municipalities. So we definitely can see if there's some standard information to see. But we all know it's we call it COVID surprise because the spending.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I think my question is similar to Councilmember Nunekamp. So when I look at the 20-year projection chart, we go from $44.6 million in expenditures in 2018 up to, in 2028, 10 years, $77.2 million. And, you know, one of my fundamental principles in life is that government tends to expand a lot easier and faster than it contracts. So as someone who sits on council, I have to think about what happens when the revenue forecast doesn't match or moves in the opposite direction from the expenditure forecast. You know, we provide a lot of services to our citizens as a full service city. And I think that many of them would find it incredibly shocking if we had to just abruptly cut $5 million or $2 million from the budget in a year-to-year cycle. If we examine the trends from 2000 to present, you'll see that when a contraction does take place, it takes place over a series of years. And then it takes a subsequent series of years for the city to recover from that hole. So one of the things that I want to do as we plan budgets in the coming cycles is actually plan for what we will do to ensure that we either have enough in reserve to cover for a contraction, or we're prepared to either limit the growth rate or make adjustments in the event that revenues don't come in as we expect. Because we're kind of guessing right now as to what the economic future will look like. And if our guesses don't go well, that could have potentially catastrophic consequences to our residents.
Yeah. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you for that, Mayor Pro Tem. Anyone else with comments, questions? Just looking over the information, I probably have doubts about the underlying assumptions that are being made early on in the presentation, but you know, it's hard for me to nitpick at some of the numbers on there. I'm just curious how those numbers came up, and you know, I guess the feeling is not something tangible that I can state that, yeah, those are way off, but there's a feeling that there is, at least in terms of the unemployment rate. I'm kind of curious whether or not it's going to stay as low as what they're stating. So,
yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I can't really nitpick on anything else.
Yeah, it's early, March 2023. So are you more concerned about the revenue or expenditures?
So I guess I like looking at the long-term picture of what may happen within 5, 10, 20 years, but also know how nimble this council is. So if there is a downturn, you know, within a given year, I know that this council will react quickly. And having that unassigned fund balance gives us the ability to not have that impact really hit our constituents. So I guess more, I think I was just looking at the underlying assumptions in terms of what the revenues were for the near term. But again, it's like, it's hard for me to say something without having actual data. Me personally have official data that would counter some of the numbers that were in the presentation, so.
Okay.
Anyone else with any comments? Member Russell.
Thank you. So my question is on the general fund balance composition in millions, where it shows that it's pretty stable. Is that all based on a 16.7% reserve all the way through 2028?
Correct.
Okay. I mean, I do agree somewhat with the mayor. I mean, I can't argue with the assumptions that you have, but that's not necessarily the feeling that I have moving forward from where we're at right now, which means at some point we could have to look at adjusting things drastically.
Okay. So do you feel the revenues is too low or too high or too optimistic?
You know, and that the revenues may be a little high. I guess what I'm concerned about is we keep looking at increasing property tax to increase the revenues instead of looking at becoming more business friendly and making sure that we increase the sales and use tax. I remember when I first started paying attention, which was probably back in 2012 2013, our sales and use tax was much higher than it is today. And I think some of that has to do with the way we view businesses. We keep saying that business tax isn't stable. Well, I think if we make it our priority, I think we could perhaps stabilize it more. So that's my only comment. I don't know that we can do it right now, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Member Woodward?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, at the end of the fourth quarter last year, when you were doing your projections, I don't know if you did them out to 28, were they this positive on the revenue side?
We did it, we compared let me give you what we did. 2021, our sales tax are 34.3 million. 2022, 40.4 million. The increase is 6.1 million, 17.8%. So we want to see what happened 2022, 2021. We know it's a very abnormal year, 2022. So we calculate number of tax filers send more than $100,000 taxes, and also collection from the dollar amount received from taxpayer who pay more than $100,000. So the number of taxpayer filers send more than $100,000 in 2021, 47 tax filers. 2022, 64. The increase is 36%. In terms of dollar amount, for the taxpayer paid at this category, 2021, 15 million, 22, 18 million, increased 22 million. So that's really skew a lot of numbers. We cannot use 2022 as a very good baseline to project our revenue. We also did another calculation, use 2019 before COVID, and use the actual increase, year-to-year increase at 7.1% to see what the 2019 baseline will give us. We feel this number is probably reasonable from both angles.
Yeah, I'm curious to know on those $100,000 ones, how many of those are outside city?
You mean for 2022 total?
Correct.
Okay, we can give you that information.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, because I noticed our outside city was looking really healthy, which is understandable because there is no furniture store here, there's no appliance store here, there's just a number of things. And considering, I think use tax is really strong, which I think speaks to a lot of the building and that sort of thing. And how long does that go on? I don't know. I mean, does it go out that far to 2018? Or 2028? I just don't know. But I think this is really a positive report. And I appreciate seeing this because it's something that we can usually really look at next quarter, going back and seeing where we're at, especially now with unemployment. I mean, our unemployment numbers for the country were down in, 250,000 people instead of 500,000 or whatever for the month. So that looks like unemployment numbers will be going up possibly. So it's just an interesting time right now. The the recession that everybody was expecting just hasn't hit yet and may not. So it's interesting times.
Yeah, thanks for your comment.
Any further questions, comments from members of council? Seeing none, Director Loh, thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we're moving on now to agenda item 6, reports from boards and commissions. Anybody have anything to share tonight? Go ahead, Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just report from Inglewood Housing Authority. The Housing Authority discussed several potential developments. These are actually in Sheridan, but I thought it was a really interesting project and that they were putting multifamily on corner lots in Sheridan where it was zoned for that, and are making those market rate affordable, which I think will be really good for the community to have some more affordable units. And there was discussion again of the potential of forming a nonprofit that could handle more of those market rate stuff that's separate from the HUD projects that they have going on. But I think that's the only thing to report. Other than that, just their normal financial and occupancy reports on the from the Housing Authority.
Thank you so much. Member Anderson, Member Newnenkamp?
Can I just ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Member Russell.
So the potential development, was that discussion mostly for Sheridan, not necessarily for Inglewood?
This was the Inglewood Housing Authority, but they update us on all the projects that are going on for those, since it's one organization that they have going on for the entire, both Inglewood and Sheridan.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Member Newnenkamp.
Thank you. Cultural Arts Commission met last week. They have decided to fund a project or co-fund a project with the Inglewood Chamber for their mural event this year. So expecting a cool new mural partnering with some local businesses, and they're working on collaborating with other partners within the city, which is great to see. They also received several submissions to their call for the median art project. So this is new gateway median art for the medians right here on Hampton. They're currently voting on the submissions that they received and will hopefully make a decision at their next meeting and move that project forward as well. So they're doing great work.
Thank you so much, Member Newnenkamp. Member Woodward, do you have something to add? Not tonight? Perfect. All right, seeing no other lights. Moving on to the next agenda item. This is Mayor's Choice. I added an item here tonight regarding the CML resolution of approving a draft resolution opposing the Senate Bill 23-213. Just as an FYI, I have supported opposing the Senate bill for both CML and the Metro Mayor's Caucus. And knowing where this conversation is kind of going, obviously the Senate bill has been changing quite a bit over the past week or two. One of the things that the Metro Mayor's Caucus has asked was also whether or not we are willing to make any amendments to the Senate bill. So I also had a conversation with our state rep, Froelich, on Friday to discuss some of the opposition that I have regarding the Senate bill. Obviously, just the fact that they are taking away our local control for land use. Talked to her about that, but also I talked about some of the amendments that I would like to see. I wasn't comfortable proposing any of those amendments without obviously having that conversation with council. So maybe that's something we want to do. But I just wanted to provide you guys a little bit of a background in terms of what I've been doing behind the scenes, at least talking to state rep. But also just wanted to put this resolution in front of you because CML has been asking cities to be doing this. So Mayor Pro Tem, I see your light's on, but go ahead.
Member Anderson was first.
Go ahead, Member Anderson.
I was going to turn mine on after you, but I left it on from before, so technically
Okay.
you're first.
I don't see the point in supporting amendments. As I see this bill, and I have not taken the opportunity to read through it, but I have attended the CML briefings, and I understand I've read the CML briefings, I should say, and I understand the spirit of the bill is essentially to rob us of local control as far as land use is concerned, and I can't support that. It's a direct threat and a significant violation of home rule, in my opinion. And I would be interested in this council having a conversation about joining the inevitable litigation that occurs as a result of this bill passing.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson?
I'm supportive of proposing some amendments. I think for me, once you once you go hard no, now you are cutting yourself off from being a part of the conversation. This is looking highly likely like it's going to pass. And so if we have a chance to have some input on the process, there's a lot about the bill that I oppose as well, but I would rather have some say in how it comes out rather than cutting myself off from that discussion before it even starts.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Woodward, did you have your light on? Okay. Go ahead, Member Woodward.
I am in support of this resolution, and it's home rule is what it's about. And having attended that Zoom meeting almost 2 weeks ago now, a week and a half ago, there was somewhere between 300 and 400 people on Zoom for that meeting. And this was the discussion, was overreach and home rule. So I support this resolution, and I think we can still offer up any amendments, but at least get the legislature clear on, hey, you're really overstepping. And that's my opinion on it. And I don't want to connect it to anything that we're doing here other than the home rule thing.
Thank you, Member. Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Russell.
Thank you. I also am in support of this resolution in opposition to statewide land use and zoning preemptions in the Senate. The bottom line is they are interfering with our ability to home rule. This is just the camel's nose under the tent. If we let them in on this, they will take away everything from us, and I do believe that we need to support CML and oppose this. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Neunenkamp.
Thank you for bringing this up, Mayor. I have plenty of my own issues with the bill. I think we all have issues with the bill. But I also agree that if we just unilaterally oppose the bill, then we are, the way this works is that we get labeled as an oppose, and then we're out of the conversation. If we want to come to the table and say, this is how you can make it better, this is how you could, we could engage, this is what we've learned in Inglewood, I think that that's a much more productive approach to the bill that I would prefer to see. I personally have thoughts on amendments. I listened to, 7 hours of the committee hearing last week. I think that our Arapahoe County is at an amend position, and they brought their ideas to that committee. I think there's some ideas maybe we could get from them about how we could move more constructively through this process. I think that also just the awareness of they have less than a month left. The bill has already undergone several amendments from the bill sponsors. There will be more to come. We might spend a lot of time coming collectively up with amendments or positions and then it be all for naught because the bill will have changed by the time we get it to them. So I think that all of us engaging with our elected representatives at the state level collectively and individually makes a lot of sense because of how quickly this is moving.
So Member Neunenkamp, I guess that was one of the things I was trying to figure out was whether or not I should continue to use my voice individually to bring up some of the issues that I happen to have with the statewide plan. Is it something that council wants to bring up as a whole in terms of putting together amendments? Or, should we just go individually to each of our state rep, state senator, in terms of just voicing our displeasure or what we want changed? So I'll let you start, Member Neunenkamp, but.
In my perspective, I think many of us have already and will continue to do that, and I think that's the quickest and most efficient way to get this done. If we were going to drive consensus at another study session in a couple of weeks, by the time, what amendments would we want to support, and by the time we get there, the bill will be on to the next chamber and under more changes. I think that we have plenty of opportunity directly to engage, and that's, I think, the most effective way to make our voice heard.
Go ahead, Member Anderson.
Well, I was just in terms of your opportunities between the Metro Mayor's Caucus and the opportunities you have on CML and Dr. Cog, I want to just give you the freedom and authority as, mayor to take take the opinions that you're hearing from this group and your own opinions and bring them up as potential amendments, not with the full authority perhaps of a resolution, but just say, here are all the things we've been discussing and the concerns that we have about this bill. I think that's one of the strongest ways we can get those concerns out there is through your voice on those different organizations. I'm of course reaching out to our state representative and state senator. I'm going to personally weigh in on the amendments I would like to see from them, but this is happening quite quickly. So getting those things on the table from multiple directions, and I think is the key at this point.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Woodward?
I guess I'll repeat again that number one, I think the mayor should have the opportunity and the ability to give him his opinion, just like any of the rest of us. But I want to support this as a group, as a council, this resolution of the overreach that's going on with the legislature. And, if we don't accept that or don't debate that with them as CML members and as CML, they will come back with it. And we'll see, as Member Russell had mentioned, we'll see additional stuff in the future where they've taken more rights. So I want to support the mayor in that, and I want to support this resolution and make a motion for this council to approve it.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm with Member Woodward. I think the resolution correctly states this is a massive assault on local control, regardless of how we amend it, regardless of what we do. The spirit of this is to supersede local control. Are we for that? Do we think that there's some form where that could look good? I don't. I'm wholeheartedly against it. And I think nothing short of that stand delivers the message that needs to be delivered here. It's just so critical that we maintain local control and that we support our other municipalities that want to maintain local control. I think we miss the boat if we say, okay, let's negotiate in this terrorist crisis. You don't negotiate with terrorists. That's not how it works. And I'm not calling our state legislator terrorists. That's a pained analogy, but the point is very similar. I don't see room for negotiation in this. It's a question, it's a binary. Do you support local control or do you not? Yes or no? This resolution says we support local control, and we believe the state legislature should support full local control, and I think that is the exact message that we need to send.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson or no? Member Russell?
I absolutely agree with the Mayor Pro Tem. We all took an oath to uphold the charter of the City of Inglewood. We are a home rule city. We are obligated to protect that and to sign this resolution. And as many citizens have been coming out to speak against this, it is not wise for any of you not to take a stand against this. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Anyone else with comments? So I wasn't expecting to actually vote on it tonight, but whether or not we would put it on the next agenda item this coming Monday, since this is a study session. So do we have a majority that would want to move it on to Monday's agenda? So I think I haven't weighed in. I'm in support of actually having it on the agenda, and I will be supporting the resolution, although I will continue to be reaching out to both my state senator and my state rep in terms of the changes I would like to see made based off the conversations we have been having with citizens and what they don't like about what we've been discussing about any potential R1 changes. So I will continue to provide that voice and let them know what the type of feedback we've been receiving. So, but I'm in favor of having this on Monday night. Anyone else with anything to add? Or all right, nothing else for me for Mayor's Choice. I'll move over to Council Member's Choice. Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
It's come to my attention that I made some ineloquent comments earlier tonight regarding our city's AV system. To the extent that those were perceived as an indictment of our staff and the job that they do night to night, I want to apologize for that. That was not the intent of those comments. Every technological system has gremlins. I don't envy any of our staff members who have to spend their Monday night with us instead of with their family. And I want to show gratitude for that. My apologies to any of our support staff who are soldiering through Monday nights with us. I appreciate the job you do. And to the extent that I haven't told you that before, I'm sorry. I hope you hear it tonight.
Thank you very much for that, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll echo the Mayor Pro Tem's comments as well. I think when we talk about some of these challenges, no one is questioning how hard our staff is working on all of it and how dedicated and how faithfully they serve us every single week and serve the city of Inglewood. And so any comments about how we experience challenges are not directed at them whatsoever. One thing that was really illuminating for me tonight in that presentation was hearing that we have staff who are regularly and consistently working overtime to make these meetings happen. One of the things that has been the most helpful for me as a council over the last year has been hearing from our police department, hearing from our library about where they're experiencing significant staffing shortages in the basic operations of the city and where we're experiencing a lot of strain. I don't think that we want to be a city where there's just an expectation that everyone is having to work significant amount of overtime to make the basic operations of the city work. So as we go into this new budget cycle, I would really like to hear from staff, where are we asking, I think, maybe unreasonable things, or where are we setting ourselves up in a way that is not sustainable for our operations, including our IT staff, because I want to make sure that they have the resources that they need to do their jobs.
Thank you very much for that, Member Noonekamp. Member Russell.
Thank you. The only thing I have for tonight is I have a huge concern. I have been contacted by businesses and property owners that have been encouraged by people connected with the city, claiming inside information to leave Inglewood because the city is going to redevelop their properties.
Member Russell, do you have more on that or anything else you can share with council?
I do not have anything else I can share with the council. I'm concerned about anyone who would claim to have inside information in presenting with authority would have these conversations. I guess that I would ask for an updated report from the special district to see if there's anyone in the special district that has done this.
Member Russell, when you speak to the special district.
The EDDA.
Okay. So the Downtown Development Authority, okay. All right. Anyone else? I see that we have an agenda item in terms of just the travel to CML conference. I think we just have to post that, right? In terms of this, we've already basically given the go-ahead to Mayor Pro Tem, as well as Member Woodward to look into travel to the CML conference in June. So I don't think that there's anything else that we need to do there. Anything else from members of council? Go ahead, Member Anderson.
I did want to mention, this is still a couple months off, but we are planning to do neighborhood rehab project again this year, June 24th. We're just going to do one event, one service day this year. And so if anyone in the community knows of anyone elderly, low income, or disabled that needs help with needs on their home, safe, dry, and warm type issues, we do porch repair, fence repair, yard work, and general safety kinds of things on homes. So we'd love to help out with some of those projects and love to hear from the community on that. And then I also wanted to let council know I have a commitment 2 weeks from tonight, so I will not be able to be at that council meeting. My daughters are having a dance recital, and I promised them months ago that I would be there. So I'm going to have to take that night off, and my regrets to missing that council meeting.
Are you sure you don't want to be here?
I would love to be here. I love city council meetings.
Member Russell.
Thank you. I would just like to bring up a concern that I have with the day of service, especially in an election year, because I think it can be a conflict of interest and could be a violation of campaign finance acts just because of things that I've heard in the past. I think that's something that we should consider. Because I think a council member brought this up a few months ago, that we need to have some discussions about conflicts of interest. And I think day of service could be one of those. Especially since we have a council member that's in charge of it.
Thank you, Member Russell. Actually, City Attorney Niles, can you just make that a council request in terms of what would classify as a conflict of interest in regard to campaign finance or whatever that acronym is? I'm trying to think of what it is off the top of my head. I can't think of what it is.
FCPA, Fair
There we
Campaign
go,
Practices
yeah.
Act. Yes.
Fair Campaigns Practices Act. All right, anyone else? Member Woodward?
Yes, I'm just wondering, Member Russell, are you thinking that, I mean, I guess I want to be clear on this, that Member Anderson shouldn't be involved in that at all, or that it should be done before August 1 or whatever the date is when you get, you have to declare or start getting your petitions?
I think that, and here's my concern. I believe that I did ask for a council request around the 2019 election. I believe that most of the day of service projects happened to be in District 3. And when I was knocking on doors, people said things, and it's very concerning to me. So I believe perhaps it is a conflict of interest for a council member to be involved in that.
Member.
Thank you.
When you say a council member to be involved, but a District 3 council member specifically then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think it probably is a conflict of interest for any council member to be, especially running it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Member Anderson, what were the dates on that?
The date is June 24th.
That's prior to the petition circulation window, prior to any announcement window. I think we can put this one to bed right now. I'm perfectly comfortable with it. As it sits right now, Member Anderson is not a candidate for council. It's not clear whether he will be. He hasn't announced, he hasn't stated any intent to run it for election again. He's run this program since before he sat on council, and he continued to run it through the duration of his council service. I see no issue at all.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Neunenkamp?
I'll just weigh in and say I also have no issue with Member Anderson doing it. I'm grateful for all the years that he's done it. I think it's been an incredible gift to our community. I have participated and volunteered. The homes I've worked on have never been in District 3, but I think that it's really valuable to our community, and we have to understand that in many ways, city council members still are city council members, even while they are candidates, and there are certain things that we can do to continue our service to the community in that position, obviously with wonderful guidance from our city attorney, but I don't have a concern about this.
Thank you, Member Neunenkamp. Member Wink?
Thank you. I also have no concern about this. And if I may, Member Anderson, what year did you begin this project, your involvement in this?
2016,
And what year did you begin as a member of council?
2019.
Correct. So that validates what Member Neunenkamp said as well. I think it's an invaluable service to the community, and I also know of homes that the group has served that are not in District 3, and so I don't see any conflict of interest here, and I'm supportive of you continuing this work. Thank you.
Member Woodward, do you have something to add as well?
Yes, I agree with the others. I also think that if it seems like there was more or all in District 3, I think that had to do with back then when the person that was finding these properties and out was actually at the police station, or being Tony Arnoldy, or I think that's where she was at, and that's where she had a lot of contact with people and stuff, was District 3, but I remember there's stuff in District 1 too, for sure. So, I don't know, I've worked on it 3 years, I think it was, and we were kind of around the area, so thank you.
Thank you. I too will weigh in. I see no problem with it. Actually, I think this year you actually have it the week after the Bittner run. So I'm actually planning on participating this year just
Okay.
because of the timing. So 17th is the Bittner run, 24th is your event. So thank you, Joe.
And I would just say, I'm thankful for council supporting me on doing this, and we've tried to advertise in various places around the city in different years. We've moved that around, and I am happy to make sure that advertisement is done. We do specifically do some flyering. Happy to make sure that the advertisement and that flyering is done outside of District 3. If that, my point of doing this is not, not to gain some kind of an advantage or something in the election, even if I am to run, which I'm undecided on that. But to serve the city and to help other people serve the citizens of Inglewood. And if putting some restriction on that would make Councilmember Russell more comfortable, I'm totally happy to do that. And we'll plan on doing that at this point. That doesn't mean that we're not going to get nominations from social media advertisements and other things that come from District 3. And we may select, it's actually quite difficult to select projects that fit all of the criteria we have to meet. And so I don't want to promise that there's not going to be any in District 3. I want to be open to wherever the people who need the help the most are. But in terms of the actual door flyering, plan on doing that outside of District 3 this year, if that helps.
Anyone else? Go ahead, City Attorney.
Just one clarification, is the council request outstanding or has it been withdrawn?
I'm happy to withdraw it.
Okay.
Thank you for that. No other comments from council. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. As some of you know, before I got here, I was a house flipper and flipped houses, and I was always amazed at how many of my neighbors would say, well, hasn't it always looked that way? After about 3 or 4 years. And I have to say, with our audio-visual system in this room, I think we're somewhat at the same place where, does anybody remember how bad it was 3 or 4 years ago? The former mayor just rode me my whole first 2 years about that system and how many problems we've had with it. And I do just want to echo the comments of the council members that really it has run exceptionally well to be a multi-$100,000 system that we've had to learn. Network administrators are helping run the system along with Big Bite and just doing a great job. So thank you for those comments. I also just want to mention that the Youth Advisory Board recruitment launched last Thursday. So we've got brochures in English and Spanish that have been sent to the school district. People can apply online for that just through our regular process. We also have been doing some recruitment at the Inglewood Public Library and the Inglewood Rec Center. Lots of posts on social media. So the deadline to apply, if you know of individuals for this new board, is May 12th. So we will continue to keep you all updated on that, and I'm glad to answer any questions if you have them.
Cool. Any questions from members of council? Member Newnenkamp?
Thank you for the update on this. I know that we had once talked about potentially asking council members to go to the school and partnering with our school district. Is that something that we're still considering, and do you need us?
That's a great question. I think that would be really beneficial. The Deputy City Clerk, Sarah Harkness, and I did get to go to the schools about a year ago and met with the student council, essentially the class officers at the middle school? At the middle school. And so I think, you all engaging in that process at the high school, maybe again at the middle school, now that we're in a new school year, would be really beneficial. So we will reach out and try to do that. Is there any other council member who would like to participate in a presentation or discussion? It was really just a discussion that Sarah and I had with them. Okay. Member Woodward?
I'd certainly be willing.
Okay. We will reach out and try to get another one of those set up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the city manager? Seeing none, city manager, anything else? All right, and with that, everyone, we are now adjourned. Everyone have a good evening. We'll see you next week.